Welcome to Think Big with Dan and Qasim. Join hosts Dan Melnick and Qasim Masood as they explore big ideas, limitless possibilities, and engage with visionaries, entrepreneurs, and thought leaders who dare to dream big, get inspired, motivated, and find practical tips for personal growth. Think big, dream bigger, and ignite your potential.
Welcome to Think Big with Dan and Qasim. If you want to go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us where you live and what you do.
Yes, thank you so much, first of all, for the opportunity, Dan. Pleasure to be here. So my name is Vincenzo Toscano, founder and CEO of Ecomcy, and we specialize in growing brands globally on Amazon. So we are a full service agency. So for brands, we help them with PPC, brand creatives, optimization, backend operations, so everything from A to Z. And hopefully today, I can share some of that wisdom with your audience. Yeah.
And where are you based out of?
I'm based in London, in the UK.
Awesome. So I'm curious more about your background. Like, how did you kind of get into this industry? Were you an e-commerce seller yourself? Like, what made you go and start this agency?
Sure. So my background, essentially, I'm an aerospace engineer. And effectively, while I was working there as an engineer, I started selling on Amazon my own products, my own brands as a side hustle. And then, thankfully, some of those were successful to the point I was making more money with that than my engineering job. And that's where I started thinking, maybe there's something here I should pursue in more depth. And that's how the idea essentially to, go deeper into the e-commerce started. From there, I started going to different events, different masterminds. And then from there, I also essentially, discovered this passion to around helping other people, like as a consultant. And that's where Ecomcy effectively was founded. And that was over 6 years ago. At the beginning, it was only myself. But now, of course, I have a full team at the disposal, 70 people globally. As I mentioned, we do everything in terms of full service around brands on Amazon. And that's a little bit in a nutshell.
And then I guess in terms of your clientele, right? Obviously that you're based in the UK. So you're mostly working with people in Europe. I'm based in the States. I'm curious, do you have clients here in the States? What does that breakdown kind of look like for you?
Yeah, so one of our specialties is global expansion. And what I mean specifically with that is we help a lot of brands in the States to expand to Europe. And we help with the whole expansion across effectively using the Amazon network. However, we don't only do that. We actually pretty much manage brands everywhere. In fact, most of our brands are in the States. And also we do other marketplaces as well, such as Walmart and TikTok in the US. So we also do other things surrounding the Amazon ecosystem that we think and we have seen actually is bringing a lot of value in terms of how diversify business and how to help our brands keep scaling forward. Yeah.
I guess in terms of like, where do you see right now as the biggest opportunity? I mean, obviously, like I'm in the States. People in the States sometimes only think about Amazon US, but do you see big opportunities in other Amazon markets around the world? What does that kind of look like from your perspective?
Yeah, so I would say with everything going on globally with the tariffs and all of that, I think expansion to Europe is definitely the place to go, because we have seen, especially in terms of growth, e-commerce across Europe has been having a significant growth the last couple of years. Amazon keeps growing year after year. In fact, every single time we do audits, a strategy to figure out how to scale these brands in Europe, we always find that there is a significant increase in search volume, the revenue that some of these categories is doing. So definitely the opportunity that people should start pursuing is expansion, and specifically Europe, because of the growth that is imminent. But on top of that, the diversification that Europe brings because of different language, different cultures. So it's also an opportunity for your product to essentially find different niches that you wouldn't find by just staying in the US.
So in terms of selling in Europe, I think many Americans sometimes are hesitant or concerned because they just don't understand. And they think that there's like lots of challenges, with regulation and VAT and selling across different countries and different languages. Like in the US, I guess like it's easier in a sense. Everybody here speaks English. It's all one country. So what does that look like if you want to sell in the EU with certain regulations in different languages and setting those things up? What does that process kind of look like from your side?
Yeah, so essentially what we find is that one of the reasons why people don't enter is, a lot of uncertainty when it comes to what are the first steps to take in terms of from a VAT side of things, the compliance, figuring out which market to go for. But the good thing is that right now there are so many, first of all, so much information out there that you can, with AI especially, you can figure out a lot of these things in a matter of hours. And the second thing is by using the right service providers, like a lot of these things can, be pretty frictionless when it comes to execution, right? right? Like when it comes to VAT, there's a lot of service providers out there. When it comes to compliance, when it comes to shipping, warehousing, and all of that, I think the most important thing, if I'm honest with you, is actually identifying the opportunities there. Because the other things that I briefly just mentioned are things that you are going to figure out no matter what, right? If you essentially put your head towards it, it's going to essentially play out. But if there is no opportunity in the first place, there is no point in doing all this heavy lifting or going through all this kind of setup process if then your product is not going to end up selling. So as long as there is an opportunity and your product can be essentially localized to this market, I think it's definitely a no-brainer because of the growth and the essential diversification opportunity this is going to bring to you.
There's certain places in Europe where you're seeing more traction. Like obviously that you're in the UK. Is that kind of where you're seeing more traction, or like other countries where are you kind of seeing like the most traction?
Yeah, I would say the markets where we're seeing the best momentum right now is definitely Germany and the UK, and then followed by France, Spain, and Italy. So usually my recommendation for brands coming from the US is, start with the UK, especially if the product can be easily localized because of the fact that the language is pretty similar. However, I still recommend that you need to do everything from scratch in terms of, even if it's the same language, you need to reoptimize your listing, localize your images. Familiarity with the market is going to be much more intuitive because of the kind of similarity across the US and the UK. And then Germany is definitely another one that is a must if Europe expansion is definitely something you are aiming, because Amazon Germany essentially, first of all, is the one that is going to give you most of the time the biggest exposure in terms of traffic. But the second thing is usually we're going to use that momentum that Germany can bring you to essentially expand across Amazon France, Amazon Italy, Amazon Spain. So we can use it as that kind of starting point and then go from there with the pan-European program.
Yeah, I guess, obviously there's many people in the Amazon ecosystem, there's providers, things like that. I guess in terms of kind of like what is your specialty and kind of what do you focus on? Like if people are kind of looking at different options, we can share kind of maybe certain niches or certain results we've gotten for clients that people can understand like the value that you can bring them.
Yeah, so I would say one of the things that really makes us different is the fact that we have, local teams in all these countries. So when it comes to localization, we really have boots on the ground, and we understand, how certain things have to be done from a visual perspective, from a content perspective, from an advertising perspective. Because at the end of the day, given that you have all this culture or different languages and different things that externally that can affect how the product is essentially perceived, you need to be very careful when it comes to bringing products to these markets. Otherwise, you could not essentially have a good growth, right, on those. So that's the most important thing that we bring to the table, like that familiarity and in-depth understanding of these markets. And the second thing as well is all the things that we do when it comes to expansion, which is not usually the case with other solutions out there, is data-driven to the point that we give you projections very accurate in terms of, what is the size of the market, what the competition is doing, how you're going to compete against this competitor, and what is going to be the roadmap towards taking over that specific niche, which in most cases we have seen that Europe is just being sold as a very kind of high level idea of in terms of this being an opportunity, but not personalizing or tailoring that to a specific brand that is looking to expand, right? So those are some of the things that really makes us different and allow us to really bring significant for the brand we work with.
So if a brand is already doing well here in the States, is there would it automatically be successful in Europe? Are there other certain things that they should be kind of looking out for if it makes sense to take their product from this market to the European market?
Yeah, so that's essentially one of the reasons why data is so important for us, because what we have found is that usually if a product is successful in the US, that doesn't always necessarily means it's going to be successful in Europe, because there are things that are going to affect how the product essentially will be sold and perform in Europe. So for example, there's weather reasons, there's cultural reasons, political reasons, there's also things that have to do with the usage and the behavior of those people in those specific countries. So that's why I always recommend that even if you are the top seller in the US for a specific category, still do your in-depth analysis by using so many tools that can help you with that, to make sure that the demand is there, that you can enter the market, and also that you can be competitive. That's not a very important thing when it comes to Europe, because sometimes, especially the US, is a stronger economy than some European countries, and that means that sometimes you might come with a very high price point that it might not be friendly for Europe, and therefore give you a disadvantage when it comes to the snowball effect that you can get to grow on this market. So those are some of the recommendations I will give. Yeah.
So I guess in terms of data, what do you look for? What are you looking for to see if similar products in that niche are selling already, or if there's a gap in the market? What kind of data are you looking looking at to make the assessment?
Yeah, so some of the things I really look forward, first of all, is the search volume associated for the keywords of this product. I want to make sure that there is enough distribution across my main keywords. And what I mean by that is I don't want to find a product that only one or two keywords that they want drawing the traffic and then there is nothing else, because when usually that's the case, what you're going to encounter is that there is not enough spread or ramification of that niche within the country, and you're not going to be able to really grow past those 1 to 2 keywords, and you're going to have a cap. So having enough keywords with enough search volume is the first thing. The second thing is price point. It's super important to understand what is the average price point in, for example, let's say Amazon Germany. If the average is 20 euros and you're going to come at 30, 40 euros, you need to understand the impact that's going to create in conversion and how you're going to essentially counteract that, either by having a better design, either by having something that really make you stand out from the crowd, or otherwise you're going to struggle. And the third thing that is very important as well in terms of metrics is also understanding what is the depth and the trends that this niche has been having on the market. So for example, if this is a market that is only relatively 1 year old in Germany, the trend is only been growing for the last 12 months, that's a good sign. That means it's an early market and it's essentially just going to get the peak potential in the coming years to come. But if you see that the trend has been already 3-4 years, and you already see that for the last 3-4 years it's been reaching a baseline, which means it's reaching plateau, most likely it's not going to grow much more than what you're already seeing on the data. And then you have to ask yourself, at the current level that the market is performing, does it make sense for me to enter? Will I make enough money to sustain myself? So those are some of the ones I would say are the main indicators. And then of course from there, which is usually the case that we do when we do these audits, we go in depth with so many KPIs, and then these KPIs, of course, are always tailored towards what are the goals of the brands.
So I guess like as of right now, right? So we're almost in June here of 2025. Are there a certain niche that you're seeing kind of take off more in Europe, or some trends right now that you're seeing across the market?
Yeah. For sure. So I would say some of the best kind of categories right now is home and kitchen, sports, supplements, and also toys and babies. So those are some of the ones that we're seeing having the biggest momentum. And then, of course, something you have to be very mindful here is a lot of things you're going to encounter with Europe as well, is that there's much more seasonality in Europe than in the US as well. So the reason why I mentioned this is like beyond these categories already mentioned, Europe can be a perfect region for those that love seasonality, like products that you can make a lot of money for 2-3 months and then you have to jump into the next product. But people that is good with seasonality in Europe, you can make very good revenue because there's not a lot of people who know how to do it, given the complexity we've been discussing. But the market, given the nature of it, is essentially always on demand of this kind of products.
So in order to get on the European Amazon, do you so each country has your own language.
Yeah.
So do you have to kind of have like a listing in Italian, for Italy and
that's
German,
correct.
so is that kind of how it works?
Yeah, so that's one of the initial bottlenecks that people encounter, that you have to essentially have this localization at the country level. And that makes the whole situation very challenging for a lot of people that don't really understand these languages or don't have the resources to localize. So yes, you need to make sure you localize. Please don't, do it cheaply with a Google Translate or anything like that, because a lot of times not only that can penalize exposure, but on top of that, that can also potentially get you suspended or things like that, because some of these translations might translate into words that might be suppressed on those keywords countries, right? So localization is key. And then another thing that I would say to take into consideration here is that when expanding, another thing you have to be very careful on the methodology as well is everything around the taxes and all of that, because each country is going to have different taxes associated to it in terms of VAT and all of that. And if you don't essentially make your price elastic enough to be essentially compatible with all these markets, you might end up getting into negative very fast if you just keep the same price across the board, right? So that's another thing you need to do, an economic model to make your product feasible for multiple markets.
Makes sense. And then so in terms of, obviously localization is one thing, but in terms of logistics and getting all of that set up, what is that? And also I'm curious about customer service. Do you guys handle those things for your clients?
Yeah, so when it comes to warehousing, freight forwarding, and all of that, we have very strong partners across Europe. So that's something that we've been doing for so many years now. We have that pretty streamlined. So that's usually something that we can execute very efficiently. And then when it comes to the fact that, going back to the localization as well, something that we can also help you do is help you with the compliance on the local level, which is something that a lot of service providers don't have. We have experts in-house that that can help you making sure your packaging, your labels, even your claims are good for France, are good for Spain, are good for Italy, which is something a lot of people encounter big issues when it comes to entering these markets. And then I guess to enter a conclusion in terms of this point, a lot of these things, to be honest with you, is things that if the product has a good opportunity, the rest can be solved, like either through partners that we have, either with internal teams that we have that are fully dedicated to this. It's something that I know sounds daunting and sometimes very stressful. At the end of the day, once you have done multiple times and you understand the methodology, which is the case here, is definitely something that we can figure out together.
So what are you kind of focused on? What are your top priorities now for the rest of 2025?
So I would say my top priority, if I'm honest with you, is exactly that, which is motivating brands and opening essentially the mindset of a lot of these entrepreneurs that are a lot in defense of going outside of the US. Like, I think this is something that's going to be key for brands to succeed moving forward, because the brands that only rely in USA for sales and the growth of the brand, they're really going to have a difficult time, because we see how the economy is being essentially fluctuating significantly with things going on with the tariffs, also how the customer behavior has been down the last couple of months in the US. So I'm just trying to do a lot of, podcasts like this, presential events, and just trying to put a lot of case studies out there to make it very clear about why Europe is definitely the place to be in the next coming months and years. Because if you don't, most likely competition is going to do it, and then they're going to have an advantage in terms of diversification that is definitely going to penalize in the long term.
So if you could go back in time to before you started this business, what is the one biggest piece of advice that you wish you knew?
So I would say the biggest advice I always give myself is try to put as much a focus as possible on product development and the branding side of things, because I think a lot of times people think that if you can choose an average product and you can make magic with advertising and tricks and all of that, which at the end of the day is good for having some quick cash, but really doesn't allow you to build a brand that can have a legacy long term. So if I recommend everybody hearing and watching this is put as much thought process on that. Like, there are so many AI tools out there that can help you validate the market. You can figure out, what a product you can bring to market that can allow you to diversify yourself. And on top of that, how to protect the product. That's another advice I would give people. Invest a lot on trademarks, patents. That's really going to allow you to create that asset that at the end of the day is going to allow you to build a business that down the line you can exit. Being honest with you, that's where you make most of the money when it comes to e-commerce, is when you exit the brand. So try to focus on always from the very beginning on the fact that you're building a brand for you to down the line to sell it. Yeah.
So if somebody watching this wanted to work with you, mind sharing your website, social media, I guess best ways to get in contact?
Sure. So if you want to find me, just look for Vincenzo Toscano, any social media, very easy to find me. Or you just go to ecomcy.com. We're more than happy for you to record a call with our team where we can just go on an audit mode and ask you all the questions regarding your brand, your products, figure out what is working, what is not working, give you as much value as possible, and hopefully try to identify ways for us to partner together and help you scale your brand product.
So thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you.